Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. For many of you, today's a really big day. Some states have started to reopen, and many borrowers are either making or not making their May 1st debt service payments today. So again, we're here. We want to continue to help provide information to owners and the industry as we all push through the impacts of COVID-19. Our focus today is still on CMBS, how the industry is working together to address the challenges. So what we want to do, we want to hear from those that are on the front line fighting for relief, our trade associations, other borrowers at the national and at the state level. Next. So quick agenda for today. We at NewGen did conduct a survey recently of approximately 250 CMBS borrowers. We want to share some of those findings and hope that some of the results of these findings can help our trade associations, officials, even the servicer industry. Hopefully they can get a better understanding of where things are at today and move that forward. As I said, we've got a wonderful panel today, an exciting panel today. We want to hear from them. And we'll talk about how all the collaboration is happening. So at the very end, we will do a Q&A session. I'm going to ask right now that for all the viewers to go to the bottom of your screen. There is a question button at the bottom, and we will start aggregating those and present your questions at the very end. Next. My name is Vinay Patel. I'm a principal at NewGen Worldwide, and we do have a few business lines. We do own hotel assets, and we do have hotels with CMBS loans. I'll be your moderator today. Next. With us, we do have Monty Bennett. Monty is the founder, chairman of Ashford Hospitality Trust and Braemar Hotels and Resorts. Many of you guys know Monty's been a public figure when it comes to CMBS and the industry as a whole right now. We know he's been working for relief programs for the industry as well as for his company. He will be joining us today. Next. We also have with us Chris Burgoyne. Chris is the Vice President of Government and Political Affairs of the AHLA, which is one of the large national trade associations for our industry. He has actually been one of the leaders in the association when it comes to the subject of CMBS. Next. We also have Joe Savarese. Joe is the Executive Director of the Ohio Hotel and Lodging Association. Joe is a thought leader on every front when it comes to hospitality. Joe has been, in my opinion, ahead of the game, coming up with ideas and actually putting those into actions. And Joe does understand the importance of building unity and coalition to help get the needs of our industry addressed at the state level. Next. And finally, we have Vinay Patel. Vinay comes from two different perspectives today. One, he is part of the National Trade Association of the Asian American Hotel Owners Association. And Vinay is also a hotel owner in the Washington, D.C. area, also a borrower of a CMBS loan. Vinay is currently the treasurer of AAHOA and will be the next vice chairman of AAHOA. So first, I want to go back to Monty. Screen, please. And allow Monty to introduce himself and tell us more about him and his company. Hi, Monty.
Thank you, Girish. I first want to thank everyone on this panel for their participation today, but especially for their involvement in the industry. I've here recently worked with a number of these folks in trying to get our industry back on track. And I know these guys have worked very hard to do that. So Chris has been on the phone with me with all hours of the day and night, and Vinay and I have been in touch, and Girish more recently. So thank all you guys for everything you're doing to try to get all of our employees back to work. I've got a few hotels in my publicly traded REITs, and then we have an advisor corp. But what I think is important is that the issues that we're facing is the same for all of us, and that is the lack of demand. Our employees that have been laid off, which is just a terrible, terrible tragedy, and breaks my heart, and I know breaks all of y'all's hearts. And the debt situation, and how we can work with lenders to come up with solutions. And so we are all in this together to get our employees back to work and to be back on a successful track. So thank you for having me here today, and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Monty. Appreciate that. Chris Burgoyne, a little introduction, please. Let the audience know what you've been doing here on the CMBS front.
Great, thank you. Chris Burgoyne, Vice President of Political and Government Affairs at AHLA. I've been at AHLA for about a little over 7 years now. And prior to this, my main focus was on labor and workforce issues and Airbnb and short-term rental issues. And I'll be candid, I missed those issues. This CMBS issue is a real challenge. And I want to thank everyone on this panel for your leadership on this issue, and everyone on this webinar for helping to bring me and my colleague Matt Carrier up to speed on what you're seeing and what you're facing on a daily basis. It's certainly a challenging issue, and one that is a top priority for AHLA to come up with some sort of a solution on. We certainly sympathize for the situation you're all in. You're in this situation because of no fault of your own. This is a global pandemic, and the federal government has had a lot of issues that have caused you all to close your businesses down. On the state level, there's been stay-at-home orders. So at AHLA, it's been a focus for us to educate folks on the issue, particularly at the federal level, with lawmakers, with regulators, and especially with the media, to help folks know that the problems you're facing, the challenges that are in front of you, and unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. So we've been taking an all of the above approach: legislative, regulatory, and state executive orders, and media stories. We know time is of the essence. We've talked to senators, members of Congress, members of the Treasury, SEC, Fed, and even had some members of Congress and senators talk to the President and Secretary Treasurer on the issue. So we've made some progress, which I know I will talk about in a moment, but we are here to help, and certainly in partnership with everyone on this panel and everybody in the industry, and on the other side, on the services side, because we have had conversations with them, and some positive, and we do see some light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a long tunnel.
Thank you, Chris. We know you're working hard out there. Joe, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, it's my honor to be here with all of you today, and to be working with so many of you, even though we're dealing with the most difficult problems we hope that you'll ever have going forward. I came on board with the Ohio Hotels and Lodging Association more than 5 years ago, January 2015. After working for a National Business Association in Washington, D.C., and running around the country an awful lot, I got to meet a lot of hotel and lodging and resort members of that organization, and developed a real affinity for the industry and working with people in it. And it was just a natural fit when I wanted to spend more time back in Ohio to come on board. We have been modernizing the Ohio Hotel and Lodging Association and getting it ready for the future. This unfortunate circumstance is greatly accelerating that, because we're all going to be operating differently going forward. But we look forward to working with all of you. We do have a strong advocacy program that I know we're going to get into a little bit today, and how hard we've been making those asks and really pushing the envelope, because we really think that it's do or die time for the industry in so many ways. And we are going to continue to be a voice for that, to build stronger coalitions, and to not be afraid to push for the things that we need, because the clock is ticking, and the May 1st flip of the calendar certainly is a watershed. And now we think we're going to see some of the things we've been warning people about all along.
Thank you, Joe. And finally, Vinay.
Thank you. Just my brief background on myself. I've got the infamous last name Patel, and I'm a second-generation hotelier. So, and one of the things that I was lucky enough in the sense that, from an experience perspective, me and my wife ran a small 15-room motel. So we literally did it for 2 years and did everything from housekeeping, front desk, to maintenance, to whatever. And typical to many of the AAHOA members that are out there. I mean, that's probably the story that many people have had out there. And so for me, I've got experience in the sense of ground up and the sense of doing everything from, running a front desk to housekeeping to whatever else is out there. And so currently, I'm based out of Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia. And we've got properties across the Northern Virginia area, ranging from a microtel to a loft hotel to a Hampton Inn, pretty much across the board in terms of the different brands that we own and operate. I also moonlight as a part-time job. It seems like a full-time job these days as involvement in AAHOA, as the Asian American Hotel Owners Association. So the current treasurer advocating on the behalf of 20,000 hotel owners and operators out there, whether it be education to advocacy on the legislative side to working or negotiating things with the brand. So I come from a very different perspective, and from the CMBS side, I currently have 2 CMBS loans. And in the past, I had the 2 loans prior to that as well. Back in I refinanced in 2007 with this CMBS loan, and then negotiated all those terms back in 2015. So I've got a different perspective and got a viewpoints on different ways as far as how we work with the CMBS side there. So, and I'm looking forward to with the panel today.
Thank you, Vinay. Let's turn our attention to the survey. We had 243 CMBS loan borrowers complete our survey note by note, and wanted to share some of those findings here today. One of the first findings you'll notice is this is across all brands. CMBS note holders are not strictly just part of Marriott, Hilton, IEG family. You'll notice that they are across the board. But I want to spend more time talking about the details that are on the right. Who our borrowers are here. You'll see that this challenge for CMBS is across the country. The respondents were from 29 states. You'll see that the total debt value that they currently have is close to $1.9 billion. But the average respondent here, our loans are smaller. Some of mine included. I've got loans across the board. But just north of $7.5 million is a current loan balance. And I think it's important for people to look at where some of their operating dollars are going. So the average debt service for these owners is just shy of $58,000 a month. And prior to going into the COVID-19 crisis, their payroll was almost the same. Roughly $51,000 a month was the average payroll of this group. Combine those two together, that's $109,000. And I think it's hard pressed to find a lot of hotels that are performing even that just to cover those 2 line items. But the employment count is an important issue here. A lot of this is a service industry. We depend on our staffs, and you'll notice, on average about 30 employees that are working in our workforce at each property for this particular base, for a total of 6,000 employees out of this group. So that tells a little bit about this audience. Next. So, kind of on the heels, when we got into this thing 4 to 6 weeks ago, I think back on March 31st, CREFC had issued some guidance around the anticipation of a lot of requests for modification. So I think some of our audiences has started going down that path. Let's talk about how this has worked out. So you'll notice that 88% of our respondents did not have any performance issues prior to COVID. And out of them, we asked them to rank, their knowledge of the workout experience, which is very different than just the origination experience. So 1 being a low level of understanding, 10 being a high, 66% rated their understanding of this at 5 or lower. So, but now they were asked to go down this process, to go through the modification with contacting their servicers. And so we started looking at when they started talking to their master servicer, and then when they ultimately started talking to their special servicer, which is again new experience for many. So out of this group, 188 have had discussions with their special servicers. On average, that was started on April 4th. And I think we're today up that May 1st. So almost a month ago when they started their discussions. I think these next results are very telling. Tells you a little bit about potentially the capacity problems. 124 are saying that they have not even received a response yet to the laundry list of items that they have submitted. Then we did ask, what did you ask for? Let's break this thing down. The two primary requests were for forbearance and the use of reserve funds. Where this gets into is one of the items requested in that guidance was to do forecasting of when do you think your property will be okay? What kind of relief and timing of that relief do you foresee you need? I think it's become pretty apparent that a lot of people in the industry believe we will need a lot of time. Let's look at that versus what they've been getting. So 129 requested for forbearance. As of yesterday, 23 of those were granted forbearance. So, close to 15-20%. And then it breaks down what they received. 5 people got a 30-day, 12 people got 90, and 6 got 120. Again, we asked people, if some of these respondents either asked for one item, many of them asked for multiple items. So 100 of these individuals requested the use of reserves. So far, 4 were granted the request to use those reserves. 63 requested the suspension of financial covenants. Many have some concerns about technical defaults. So far, 2 have been granted that. And then in the same light, the concern around the ongoing reserves for their cash flow concerns. And so 60 people did request suspension of reserves. We do not have a single one yet that has received that from our pool. The big common denominator is the request for EIDL or PPP loan relief. 55 requested it. 46 have received one or both. It seems that PPP has been an easier lift. EIDL has been maybe a little bit more of a challenge, but it seems universal that the servicers are providing for that. So I think in our future discussions with servicers, I think that will become more standardized. Unfortunately, 19 individuals were declined for their request. And the reasons are kind of laid out there. Either it's too new. There is a discussion there about fees we'll talk about here in a moment. Different levels of responses that these individuals have gotten. Obviously, 86% of all these individuals are still waiting for a resolution. Many of them do not know when to expect that resolution. On the right, you'll just notice out of this group, who were the primary special servicers. 26% was Midland, 25% Rialto, 14 L&R. When that's 65%, the balance is just a makeup of quite a few other special servicers. I did want to highlight, we did ask some of these borrowers for some comments, and there are a few that really stood out to me. So I wanted to read one to you. This is my first CMBS and really appreciate the education I've received from fellow owners. When an event like COVID-19 happens, it is our legislators' responsibility to protect us. I'm ultimately to blame for not doing enough research. I signed on the dotted line, but I should have been protected from an event like this, as it is completely out of my control. Having to lose everything that I built over the last 12 years is difficult. And I think this is just a little bit of sentiment of how some of these owners are feeling in this immediate shock. Next. Here we did list out questions regarding costs. So I want to go to the bottom area first. There's a question about fees, and it seems like, are fees potentially distracting some of the negotiation? How much is it impairing the discussion? So 80% of the respondents in their discussions have not received an estimate for servicing fees. I think people are aware that there is going to be a charge for this. 84% have not received an estimate for legal fees, knowing that there's Some of these are considered modifications versus consents. So then we also break down the fee schedule. And so if you kind of look at it, if there was a $10,000 fee for the special servicer and potentially a $10,000 fee for the legal costs, that $20,000 totals, about 40% of what the monthly average payroll is for these borrowers. So this is a factor that they're considering. I think the part on the right talks a little bit about their confidence level. Again, they're concerned about what could happen down the road. How many expect that their servicer will still work with them beyond 90 days? Their confidence is fairly low. But when it comes to the fear that the lender will foreclose, there you see an interesting mix. Some believe it's low, some believe it's in the middle, and some believe it's in the high, and they're pretty average there. So what that led us to is kind of conclusion of where we're at with the problem for today. There's a challenge that these owners feel relative to responsiveness of the servicers. There is a transparency challenge about the process and the fees that are associated to this. Lack of knowledge in servicer negotiation workouts. Clearly that is a big challenge to try to get through any of these hurdles. And many have even expressed to me that they're concerned about what happens in 3 months if we have to go through this again. And that really relates to the fear of their future. So another quote on your right just says, an owner felt the current fee structure to engage special servicers is arbitrary and defies logic. In an unprecedented time like this, rules of engagement for special servicers must be changed. Again, maybe a sentiment that some are feeling about the COVID-19 impact. So let's continue on. So I'd like to let Monty talk a little bit about the borrower side from where he's at. We want to understand, how much are you feeling in the same light? Clearly, I know you've been in the news a lot lately, Monty. Tell us about the impact of what's going on to you and your company relative to COVID-19 and with some of the media issues.
You bet, Garish. Thank you for that. And thanks again for having me on this panel. This COVID-19 epidemic has been devastating to our company and to our employees. We've been in the hospitality industry for decades, my father before me, and this is the worst that I've ever seen, and I never, ever thought I'd have to say those words after what we've been through. It has been tough. Our platforms, especially our Ashford Hospitality Trust platform, is leveraged more than other publicly traded REITs, but it's leveraged less than many private owners in the 65% or so range. And so our problems on the debt side are similar in that regard, and have an interesting nuance in that as a public company, all these hotels are owned in special purpose vehicles owned by the public company. Well, the public company has all kinds of costs that they have to pay, right? There's preferred dividends, there's a public filing fees, and on and on. And in the current environment, when all the hotels are performing as they are with revenues 90% down or something, there is no money coming from these subsidiaries to the parent company in order to meet all these costs, many of them legally required. And that is a peculiarity that we are facing and working through and struggling with. We have a decent amount of cash on hand, but I think like everyone on this seminar, we'd like to plan and we like to be careful, and no one knows how long this is going to go on. And so it's hard to break with too much of that cash without having some kind of a visibility of what's going to happen, which no one really does. So we are working a lot with the lenders out there. We have a number of CMBS lenders, and then non-bank lenders, and then traditional bank lenders. And the CMBS folks are acting really not much different than what what everyone on this call is experiencing based upon the commentaries and the survey results that I've read, in that they just don't seem very equipped to handle this. And I don't think anybody's prepared, and certainly the documents didn't really anticipate something like this, something so severe and something completely out of the hands of all of us. And our employees are all suffering because of it. And so what we need as an industry is a plan and a path forward. We need to coalesce, and we need to step forward and seek solutions that will help us. And these solutions involve building demand back for our industry. The solutions include bringing the lenders in with us and having them understand to not treat this as if it's just a normal situation where there's recession or there's a bad borrower and they're trying to collect what they can. This is different. And I don't think the lenders appreciate that difference. And then we need help from our government. We did not cause this. The government is the one that shuts everything down. And all we're looking for is to survive and have a place for our employees to come back to work. No one is looking to profit from this, but we are all being devastated. And the PPP program helps somewhat for some folks, but it's not nearly enough, and it's not designed in a way that's particularly helpful or useful. And our government needs to help. And thus far, their help has been very much lacking. So we definitely, as a group, have a lot of wood to chop in order to recover from this. And like so many things in life, it's going to be up to us to get together to go solve them.
Monty, I think, it's probably a wise time, and just want to address the gorilla in the room. Clearly the subject about PPP and the amount of funds that a large company has taken, some people, obviously are not comfortable with that. Recently there was news of HRSA, feeling the pressure and returning their funds. We know that there are small businesses, focusing just around the smaller hoteliers, that feel that, they're entitled to these funds as well. And they want to feel that, somebody else that's in our industry, just because they're larger, didn't just get the advantage of being larger. What are your thoughts on what your company plans to do with funds from PPP? Give us a little bit of your insights and thoughts on that.
You bet. Thanks. I appreciate you mentioning HRSA. The Shaws are good friends of mine and are just great people. And if you read any of their statements, they echoed some of my sentiments, which is, they did what they thought they were supposed to do. When this program was put together, the PPP program was specifically designed for small businesses in one category, and then also for small and large businesses with NAICS code 72. And that's hotels and restaurants. And that's specifically in the legislation. It was specifically designed for larger hotel groups and restaurant groups as well. And for whatever reason, that's how Congress and the administration chose to help this industry, which has been the hardest hit industry. This was their choice of how to address it. Also, at the time when they put the loan together, or the program together with $350 billion in proceeds, no one thought that would be exhausted or that would be limiting to other people. And so we did what everyone else did. Okay, I've been screaming to the government to apply or to get some help. Here's a program that applies to us. We've got shareholders and we've got 7,000 employees, of which we had to lay off almost 95% of them. And I think those employees coming back to work are just as entitled to come back to work as employees anywhere. And so we applied. We've got a good portion of the proceeds. But since that time, the media narrative has been really playing up that this is just for small businesses, and that's just wasn't how it was designed. And for whatever reason, the administration is playing into that. And so as you see the successive rules coming out, because as a government a lending program, they can change the rules on the fly. The rules for larger platforms like ours just become more and more restrictive. So it's difficult to say whether we're going to be able to keep the proceeds, because the rules are just getting so tough here in retrospect as the government changes the rules on us. I don't know if we'll be able to keep them, and if at any point I thought this was stopping anybody else from getting any kind of proceeds. Well, of course not. Would I want to deprive other folks from getting proceeds? And none of that was communicated or clear from the beginning. It was, you wanted some help, here's the help, go apply. So that's what we did, right? We need help. There's no question about it. So we'll see what happens here in the short term. I do know of businesses out there, not hotel related, but in my opinion, just absolutely do not need the proceeds and have applied and have them. And if we do end up going through and returning some or all of these proceeds, I sure hope it goes to our friends in this industry. But since the number of, I think the proceeds to our industry is something like 3% or something of the entire monies allocated, I don't know that will happen, unfortunately. If we do give it back, I wish I could just assign it to my friends in the industry, because I know how bad our industry has been hit, and we have been hit the worst. But that's not how it works. It'll just go back into the program. So the short answer is we don't know. It's hard to say. We applied for a program that was designed specifically for companies like ours. The rules have changed on us, and we're evaluating that now to see what the best thing to do is.
Well, Monty, I thank you for being candid about that. I'm sure you've been getting that a lot. I'm sure there'll be more questions in the queue, but we do have a lot of content, so I want to keep moving on. One thing I do want to do, can we go back, Mike? I want to talk about recovery real fast. From your view and through the circles that you participate in, you may have a better view than some of the smaller owners. How do you foresee recovery? What do the timelines look in your opinion and through your world?
Well, thanks for asking. I think that if you look back at the 9/11 crisis and you look at how long it took for the industry to recover on a real basis, right? Not nominal dollars, but real dollars. It took about 5 years. And then after the financial crisis, it took about 8 years to get to the exact same spot on a real par basis, and therefore on the same real bottom line basis. This situation involves a downturn that will probably be much worse than either of those. And it also involves a situation where people will be literally afraid for their lives to travel. Not everybody, but some people. Unfortunately, I think that doesn't bode so well for our industry. So we're going to see drive-to markets start to pick up faster, roadside type properties to pick up faster, fly-to markets, higher end type of hotels, especially those group related, are just going to have a much tougher slog. We own a company that's is an audiovisual and event production company, and you can imagine how many people host events now. The revenues at that company was even worse than the hotel industry. It has dropped 100%. So any businesses that rely on that or conventions, it's just going to be tough. So I think you'll see a pretty decent uptick here over the next 4 months, but then it's probably going to be a long slog to finish out maybe the last 20% or so of recovery of revenues from where we were. So I think it's going to be a tough road ahead of us.
Thanks, Monty. Actually, it's a good transition. I want to turn it to Chris. So, Chris, there's a lot of programs that are out there, that we talk about, government with the PPP program. There's, Main Street lending that's out there. It seems like the national conversations around financial assistance, maybe less on the regulatory side, but there have been a few. So let's get into those. Let's first dive into the TALF program. A lot of hoteliers have heard about it. Want to understand, what is it really intended to do, and how does it work? Can you explain a little bit more of that?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. In terms of the PPP, the goal of that has always been, the Paycheck Protection Program, and certainly our industry has been very supportive of that exact thing happening. And, for the industry as a whole, we've been so focused on, make sure we're taking care of our people first. And I think, everyone on this phone can attest that that is our number one goal as an industry, and something that I think we've been successful doing in a number of places. The second part of the equation is, what we're here talking about, which is the debt side. And as we have the challenges with the rigidness of the CMBS side, one of the biggest reasons for that is because of the government regulation and the way that the securities market is regulated. So what the TALF program does, on April 9th, the Fed and Treasury announced this, that, they announced the program before, but on April 9th, they announced that private label commercial mortgage-backed securities would be included in this. And that's important because this financing facility ensures that the debt in this market will continue to be available to hoteliers. So we certainly are supportive of this because it helps, stabilize the CMBS market. We certainly are supportive of it because it helps, ensure that the servicers are at a place where they can provide forbearance. But our big concern here is, are they going to be doing that? And we see that they are not doing that to the level that they should be. So while we're very supportive of the larger programs that kind of help stabilize the market, we continue to be very focused on making sure that the servicers are in return providing that relief to hoteliers and borrowers, which is the intention of kind of what the TALF program is set out to do, is create the environment where that can happen.
And there's also another ruling that happened, and it's related to REMIC laws and the fact that this industry is fairly unregulated. But most of the regulation lies under IRS codes. So on April 4th, there was a new safe harbor provision that happened through the IRS codes that also gave some more flexibility to the servicer industry to help the borrowers. Can you explain what happened in that safe harbor provision?
Sure. So this was focused on forbearance, particularly on agency mortgage-backed securities. So the federally backed ones, the ones that are connected with Fannie, Freddie, and FHFA, which more times are on the multifamily side, and where it is in essence a government entity, there's the ability to provide the direct guidance that forbearance shall be granted to borrowers. The challenge that hotels have is that we're private label CMBS. So the federal government is having issues of trying to figure out, how do you handle issuing that type of guidance on the private market side. So the IRS rule focuses more on the agency side CMBS and loosening the regulations and cutting the red tape to allow them to provide that relief. And that's where we continue to try and figure out solutions with lawmakers, is how do we take the agency CMBS relief that was provided through the IRS rules and bring that over to the private label side. And that is something that we continue to have conversations on. Joe and I were actually on the call earlier this morning with a congressman talking about just that. So we hope what they're doing on the agency side with the IRS rule, they'll be able to transfer over to the private side, which is going to be a process. But I believe that when you see it happen on the agency side, it's a path for us to follow on the private label side.
Joe, maybe this is a good time for me to loop you in. Give us some thoughts on that, Joe. Can you go back, Mike?
Well, I think that the continual push in the drumbeat, is definitely having an effect. I think that we've seen that impact as we continue to have these one-on-one interactions with lawmakers, as we did today, and we have a number of these coming up. So, our strategy has been to continue to push for as much as we can. And it was really gratifying, I thought, in the call that we had today, that the congressman that we spoke with in a very small and limited venue was very up to date, very apprised with what we were doing, and seemed, to be very amenable in working with us in the directions that we want to go. We have some very significant hurdles ahead, but I think that there is some hope and some promise if we start to coalesce with the right people that we're putting the pressure points on, that we can, start to move that forward. And that's what we, and working with Chris and his counsel, is indispensable about where do we need to focus that. I think that's how we'll get that done.
Chris, back to you then. Let's talk about the funding element. So we're talking about the national push. The Main Street Lending Program was brought out through a letter on April 16th. Tell our audience a little bit more about what that program envisioned and where it's at today.
Sure. So the Main Street Lending Facility has upwards kind of unlimited resources at this point, it seems like, but I think they're looking at about the $600 billion aspect of additional funding to provide certainty to the lending markets. And one of the proposals that we worked with AAHOA on, and all of the state associations, including Joe and Ohio Hotel and Lodging, and we had about 2,300 signatures on this. So thank you to many of you on this call for joining us in this effort, was around providing a industry-specific, lending-specific solution to the CMBS problem, because we weren't able to get any type of private label forbearance included in the CARES Act or previous legislations. So we saw this as a vehicle where we might be able to come up with something creative. And what we had proposed in this is a facility that would allow you to work with the servicer to get loan programs through the federal government to ensure that the bondholders are made whole, because that's the whole issue we have here. Is the contracts are in place to protect the bondholders, and we want to make sure that the echo chain continues on that front. We feel that the federal government has a role to play in this because it's a public health emergency, again, to no fault of your own. So we put forth a proposal, and we've been still pushing for that. The Main Street, the Fed had a press conference the other day talking about the rollout of this program. They did talk about industry-specific programs. We've been in close conversations trying to continue to push this effort. Some feedback that we've heard from a number of senators and members of Congress that have talked to the secretary and also the president on this is that they're trying to make sure that the programs that are put out there fit within the parameters that apply to all industries. So we're still trying to figure out how that can be tweaked. But the good news is our proposal that was put forward, for every action is a reaction. And we heard from other industries that have CMBS concerns that they have proposals. And we also got some pushback from the servicers and special servicers saying this doesn't work. So our response to them was, well, great, come to us with something that does work. This is an urgent issue that needs an urgent solution, and we're trying to get to that point. So we think that our proposal was a good starting point. We're hopeful that, we can continue to work out, solutions that work for the hotel industry. They work for the servicers, they work for the special servicers, and they're supported by the federal government, because I think, as we all have said and agree, we're in this together and we need to come up with solutions together.
And in that light, where are current discussions with the servicer and the lender associations? CREFC and MBA, we understand those are two organizations that are kind of working hand in hand. Where is AHLA with that relationship?
Sure. We have had, there's been a lot of conversations. Earlier this week, our CEO, Chip Rogers, had a conversation with one of those trade group CEOs, and I talked to my peers at those trade associations on a daily basis, if not multiple times a day. And what we're doing is we're relaying feedback from what we're hearing from our side, from what they're hearing from their side, and trying to create that Venn diagram to see, like, where does this all overlap and how do we come to a solution on this? They have a set of stakeholders. We have a set of stakeholders, and we recognize that we're in dire circumstances here. My message to them has often been, I don't think that they quite understand the pain and the suffering that is going to be happening in our industry. And when we look at a CMBS loan, we don't look at it for a monetary policy. We look at it for the people behind it. So if one CMBS loan from a hotelier goes into special servicing, what does that mean for the jobs? What does that mean for the local government? What does that mean for real estate taxes? And what does that mean for lodging taxes? And what does that mean for the ecosystem of local communities? So we're relaying that message to our counterparts. I will say there's a level of frustration that I don't think that they see the urgency we do, but it has been a very positive conversation, and it has been a fruitful one. There are a number of letters that I mentioned earlier that we joined together. But we also separately continue to push for the borrower relief, which we're trying to get them to the position where they can support that. But again, they have, rules of the road that they need to follow. And we're trying to work with them to ensure that lawmakers understand what those are, and we can come up with some creative solutions to make sure that that relief comes down to the hotel level property to save jobs and to make sure that we don't feel the pains that foreclosure and hotel closure will bring to local communities.
Thanks, Chris. I just one more question for you. So AHLA is rolling out another survey. I think it's wonderful. It sounds like we just need to keep helping provide information about what's really happening. So is there anything else besides that survey that AHLA needs help with that the borrower community can support?
Sure. And, it's for all of us here. And, I know Vinay is on the call, and I talk to Shirag Shah with AAHOA on a constant basis, and Joe as well. And we compare notes of what we're seeing and what we're hearing. And that information is incredibly valuable. Any letters that you've received, any letters that you've sent, any email traffic that you have, we really need to see it to have the evidence of what's going on. Conversations and phone calls are helpful to inform us and to bring us up to speed. But when we're working with counterparts, when we're working with legislators, when we're working with the press, they want to see it. Seeing is believing. So anything that you're seeing, we want to see as well, so that you can help bring us up to speed and help us understand in real time what the challenges are you face. And I've talked a lot about challenges, but we also want to know the good experiences. We have heard not all lenders are the same. Relationship banks have been, generally speaking, very good to work with. Bigger banks have had mixed results. And we know that the big challenge is on the CMBS side due to the rigid nature. So we're trying to identify which companies are doing that well, which companies are not doing that well, so that we can, kind of highlight good actors and make sure that people know that bad actors do exist and what their practices look like, so that we can, highlight that and educate both the media, general public, and lawmakers on how folks are not recognizing the COVID-19 world that we live in. And, they need to do it sooner rather than later, because jobs are at stake and because livelihoods are at stake for the businesses that you've built throughout your career and your entire life savings. So what we need is your continued engagement, your continued education of us on this issue, and any documentation that is passed along the way.
Thank you, Chris. And we will be sharing the results of our survey with you and AAHOA as well. So let's turn. Thank you. Let's turn to Joe. Let's turn to Vinay. No, did I go back? I apologize. Let's go to Joe. So Joe, your state's been doing some wonderful things in Ohio. I think a lot part has to do with your leadership. And this is going to cover both CMBS and non-CMBS. And so maybe I'll jump directly first to maybe the CMBS piece of this. Sure. Ohio has some very unique provisions that work in line with CMBS. Can you talk about that, please?
Well, Ohio and Michigan had the foresight after a really bad court decision in Michigan more than 13 years ago. I think that decision was maybe about 15 years ago now. That a couple of years after that, we put a section in state statute that is a borrower-friendly, non-recourse mortgage provision that states that in periods of economic downturn, you can't use just the circumstance of the bad economy to trigger bad boy recourse provisions, because the economy is out of the control of the borrower and the impacts on the business don't warrant triggering those negative provisions. That was very interesting when some of our members approached us and started to talk about that, because it certainly has relevance. And while we've talked about that provision as is in some of the certain circumstances that we face now, we also talked with lenders who said, since we have this existing section in Ohio statute, and only Ohio and Michigan do, so this may not work for every state, but we can open the books up and say, we already have CMBS specific, non-recourse, borrower-friendly language in statute. Can we enhance that by including some language that is specific to the current circumstances that we face, and the fact that you can't take disaster relief because that's going to trigger recourse provisions, and things that just, we argue that was never intended to be the case. And the legislature and leaders within it have actually looked upon that favorably. And I think what helps us is that there already is a section, there's a chapter of code on non-recourse that we can fit this in. So one of our first asks when they came to us and said, give us your laundry list and let's talk about what do you think we can do. CMBS, we've been talking about this since the second week of March, after our first big event in Ohio got closed on March 6th. We foresaw this coming with some of our owners. That was one of our asks, to say, let's get with the borrowers. Here's the language that they say, if we included in the code, they would offer the type of flexibility that we're looking for, at least the good actor, ones that we can work with. And it would be, a starting point, for us to work from while we work on some of these other things. Now, the problem with the process is that Ohio put everything on a policy standpoint in the parking lot while they focused on the medical emergency and that response and flattening the curve, and actually only did some governance issues, including unemployment and some workers' comp, and allowing state bodies to meet electronically in a piece of legislation early on. But after that, they went out of session and didn't deal with any other policy issues. So time lagged, and we've been impressing upon them, each week we're closer to another deadline. Now we're at the beginning of the month. What they are working on now, they tell us, is an omnibus piece of legislation that would have all of the policy related to COVID-19 and the economic impacts in it, and some appropriations. And our fight right now is to make sure that we can get a provision in there that amends that chapter of code for borrower flexibility to be very specific to this situation. And we've gotten great response to the lawmakers that we've talked about it. Ohio does have a Republican controlled legislature in both houses and very business friendly. So I don't think that, there's a lot of opposition from legislators, on a philosophical stance. I think we'll just have to work through the language that we've submitted with what the borrowers say and see if that will work out. Now, that was part of our overall plan, but it was our first punch in saying, how can we do something at the state level to address something of this national impact? Because we knew the steps that it was going to take, as Chris just explained, how long we've been working on this on the national level as well. But it helps make the argument, even with our federal lawmakers too, to understand the issue and the problem, because we're banging the drum and sharing those examples about why we need to do these things, and that every day, the deadline is more and more imminent, and we really are running out of time.
And so, Joe, outside of CMBS, I mean, you've actually put forward a lot of items for general relief, because the response that's needed, we talk about it for borrowers at the national level, but there's a lot that can happen at the state level. So tell us a little bit about some of those items.
Well, we did, and we have good partners within the legislature and relationships we maintain, and the lieutenant governor, who's the point person on the business response. They were asking us for our input. Give us your, laundry list of the things that we need to consider. So I didn't hold back, and I know Girish has shared some of what we've done, and then we've added some things to that to share with other states. But in Ohio, we presented a list of 15 items when they asked us for, here's everything that we could do. And that ranged from direct financial support, which other states were already putting programs in place. Illinois had a hospitality grant program that restaurants and hotels were already drawing money from when they proposed this. I believe that they have since exhausted that fund, but there are a lot of businesses that benefited from it. And there were other states that were putting money into play, from New Jersey and a few southern states, and we just weren't taking that action yet. We also focused on cash flow because cash is king, and we're talking about that every week in terms of what we can defer for payments for the state. The first state sales tax deadline came and went, and they didn't act. And the second one came and went, and they didn't act. And each time we had more hotels that just didn't remit. And we've impressed upon them, this third one, unless you really want to create, a huge problem, we've got to act before it because the number's going to go up exponentially every time. So deferral of sales tax, state payroll taxes, other fees, fees that are tied to annual licensures and inspections, our property tax, which happens at the local level, but which is done under state law. They could definitely provide the guidance and create the process for the local governments to provide the deferrals, including the waiver of penalties and other charges on the property tax side. They're very much listening to us about the hold harmless provisions for liability because they want us to continue to remain open and to help lead the way for economic recovery. And if we start getting a whole slew of drive-by and nuisance lawsuits about infections and things of that nature, like we've seen in other circumstances with ADA and other things, we want to nip that in the bud before that becomes a problem, and have gotten good response. We're talking about business interruption insurance and what the state can do in that regard. Really, the things that got the only pushback that we experienced were ones that had direct funding, like an emergency grant program for hotel and hospitality businesses, or funding for grants for individuals in the hospitality who were displaced early on. If there was a direct need for them to provide grant funding immediately, those are the ones they're saying, well, wait a minute, we'll discuss. The ones that talked about deferrals, we actually got a great response. I had some people say, you're crazy asking for that many things, but we presented it to the task force of the legislature and then legislative leaders individually and in some online forums. And right off the bat, there were 8 of the 15 things that they were agreeable to. One of the things that the governor sort of did already, so it didn't count. And all the other ones involved direct funding, which they're just worried the state isn't going to have the funding. But I have an answer for that too, because our 15th ask was we could actually do a lot to provide hotels economic assistance in the state of Ohio if we would close the online travel company tax loophole that exists, that they don't remit taxes the way that we all do. And we've costed that out, and we know that that produces between $30 and $50 million a year in taxes that they already collect, but they don't remit to the state. And that's money that the state could be using to help avoid permanent damage to our industry and to the travel economy. So still very much a work in progress, but if you don't ask, you're not going to get. And as an agent for all of you, I can't imagine why I wouldn't ask for anything right now that would be of help. I think we've got a strategy of, not asking for things that aren't workable, but asking for the things that we need to avoid permanent damage and permanent job loss. And I think that message is getting through as Ohio starts to transition from the focus on saving lives and the medical response to back to business, which those of you watching the news may have seen. This is the first week in Ohio. Today was actually the first day where they allowed some medical business procedures to reopen. Next week, some construction. The week after that, some retail. Hotels were never required to close, but each of these steps is going to help us get a little bit closer back to regular operation.
Well, I think that's that last piece when it comes to the OTAs, I'm sure you're going to make a lot of fans here in this audience. And I know you're going to be a part of a lot of other conversations. I know that for all the audience, there is sections in every state. They can see where they're at, same way that Joe has talked about Ohio. So, and there's a lot of support coming on that end. So let's talk about that real quickly here. Vinay at AAHOA, you've got some initiatives and some plans around helping some of these actions like Joe was talking about, as well as with AHLA. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on?
Sure. Again, just to kind of keep timing of an hour, and I see a lot of questions online here as well, so I'm just going to keep it brief. One of the advantages or disadvantages, I guess, being last is a lot of things are covered. Just kind of go. One of the things, obviously AHLA has done a great job. I think a lot of the state associations are doing a great job in terms of getting it out there and stuff. So one of the advantages that AAHOA has overall is that most of the people that we're talking about that are members are where the rubber hits the road. You're talking about operators who are there on the front lines, and some of the things that we are taking advantage of. I mean, just right now, even when you look at the association as a whole, we're comprised of board members, geographically divided, and each board member has ambassador support. So each one gets a 12 ambassador group that they have that represents the membership that's in the individual states. And so these are the people that are rubber hits the road there. And so when we talk about helping out on the state side, working with the state associations, and how do you kind of get some of our messaging across to the legislative side, whether it be state or federal side. I think that's one of the advantages that AAHOA has. And working with partner associations, obviously AHLA, to NABHOOD, to the Latino Hotel Owners Association, and some of the industry ones, shopping center associations, whatever else is out there, something we've kind of done a good job in terms of working with a lot of different associations out there and stuff. So, when you talk about any differences compared to what AHLA is doing on the AAHOA side, one of the things that even in my conversations with Congress people has been their lack of awareness. And when you go, especially when you talk about CMBS loans, I even spoke to my local state legislature from Virginia as a congressman out here, and he's a businessman on top of that. And then you talk to him and say, hey, these are some of the issues that we're facing. And so it's a bit of an awareness issue. They're like, what is it? So now the first half an hour or whatever we're talking to them is purely basically making an awareness and, hey, this is what this is impacting many of the members and their voters. And so, again, another advantage the association has is that people that are talking to them are their respective voters. So, and even right now, with many of the legislatures being home right now, I know they're not in D.C., and so they're in their respective states. We've asked all members, hey, look, if you've got your state senator, or if you've got your congressional person or whomever, go out there and visit them. They're in their offices, or they're there, or they may not be able to visit them face to face, but at least call them and do what you can when they're there, so that way we can get our voices heard. And politicians listen to voters, and at the end of the day, they're going to listen to me. If I'm coming from Virginia, I'm going to talk to my state legislature compared to Chirag in D.C. If the association goes talk to the senator, they may not be as receiving compared to a voter who actually goes to them. So we're taking advantage of that and talking to a lot of different legislatures on this issue of CMBS, and that the biggest issue has been the awareness program to these guys here. And so, and one of the setbacks is that when you mention CMBS, and they automatically think Wall Street, and all of a sudden they get, hey, wait a second, this big thing, this big business, and I'm not saying they turn negative, and so it's just been a hurdle to kind of cross it and say, hey, look, this is a loan that an individual would get. It may be backed by the CMBS mortgage back, but at the end of the day, it's on the back of a hotel operator who actually put his equity into it, and then the loan comes in for that side there and stuff. So that's been a challenge on their side. I think as far as what we're working on from the association perspective, we kind of mirror a lot of the AHLA's agenda. We work with them, and we also have things that may be pertaining to ownership, and then we'll work on a sideline there. But I think at the end of the day, we work well together, and on the CMBS side is something that we need to kind of focus on for our membership here. So, but that's what we're doing there as far as what the association is doing in terms of how we want to help out.
Thank you, Vinay. And that actually is a good transition to our second to last slide here. So there are direct owner initiatives that are in process right now that's meant to help define the story to those local congressional leaders, to potentially the servicers. There's currently, I'm aware of an owner-borrower site that's being created with the intent to provide some resources, best practices, some articles and data about CMBS borrowers, about our job force, And also we'll have some other piece of information there that the press can go to as well. That's currently under development. I do want to draw your attention to a website called the Fairness in Lending in hotellending.org. And it's a prompt for a more, I think, reasonable request that potentially meets all sides, from the servicer lender side to the borrower side, that can be had in the background, and potentially that the congressional leaders or our trade association can help facilitate these direct conversations with servicers. And we know that is intended to be a wide cast request, because I think that's been the hardest thing that I've heard, is a common ask. And this one is meant to be a more wide spectrum common ask that's reasonable, and it's a give or take. It's currently in comment period as well, but you can see the initial draft of that if you go online. So that takes us really to our Q&A session. I know we're running right here a little bit over an hour. And I want to be able to open it up. Kyle, I know you've probably been synthesizing some of these questions, so if you have any, please bring them.
Yeah, thanks, Girish. So we heard this a couple times, that the government has obviously pushed out relief, but it is not enough for hoteliers. Being asset owner and employer has a lot of responsibilities, and the current relief has not been sufficient. So a question to both Monty and Vinay: if you guys had just one ask for additional relief that could be granted by the federal government, what would that be? Vinay, let's start with you.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead, Vinay.
Relief in the sense of, I think me and Monty had talked about this a few weeks ago. Obviously, some sort of financial help is what we need. And the sad reality is that, all the current proposals that's been out there, it's all been loans, 2 years or 4 year amortization or whatever. And I think that what we really need is something more long-term. I think that if we have any kind of lending with low, I'd rather have no lending, I'd rather have forgiveness. But I guess in this large amounts, it may be difficult, but I think that my ask would be that what I've seen so far, the PPP has been very limited. Obviously, it's very constricted on what you can use it for. I mean, I can't even use it for mortgage. I can, but a lot of it has to be used for payroll and all that stuff, which is fine. I think nobody's saying we shouldn't. But I think that my ask would be simple. Hey, look, if there is some sort of a lending program with a long amortization, I think originally they had something where you had a 30-year amortization that makes it a lot easier to kind of bear that. Because at the end of the day, this 90-day forbearance or even 120, it's just kicking the can down the road. What's going to happen on day 89? When that bill comes in on day 89, it's not like I had a lot of business over the last 89 days that I'm going to be able to pay this year. And all we're doing is basically pushing it down 90 days. And so we really need some long-term help in terms of long-term financing. Even 4 years, again, look, we'll take what we can. I'm not complaining. Beggars can't be choosers. But I think what we really, really need is something that's more on the long term, that we can kind of use the cash and ride this the prices out.
Monty, want to take that?
I think Vinay, hit the nail on the head. If you look at the airline industry, which has been hit about the same as the hotel industry. Some people say it more, some people say less, but these are the two industries that have been hit the most. This industry has received billions and billions of dollars in grants. And the hotel industry needs the same. The hotel industry needs help. We have many more employees than the airline industry does, and we want to put them back to work. And giving hoteliers debt on top of the debt that they already can't repay seems foolish. The industry needs grants along the lines of what the airline industry has received.
Thanks for that, Monty.
I'm bringing the one question real fast. I'm noticing a few questions about AHLA and AAHOA's outside lobbying. Do both organizations have outside lobbying firms, and what are they saying, I guess, when it comes to CMBS?
This is Chris. So we have an internal team of lobbyists, and we have some consultants that we work with. And one of the things that we've been hearing from people that know the financial services industry well is we really need to build a larger coalition around the issue, because as you can see right now with every business and feeling the impact, it's a matter of, strength in numbers. So we've been working closely with the shopping centers. We've been working closely with a lot of the real estate trade groups and the retail groups, and trying to build a larger coalition of people who have interest in the issue, so that we can try and get a larger swath of people to work on the same issue, which we think will help us accelerate the solution.
Vinay.
So from the AAHOA perspective, we kind of have to use outside lobbyists. I mean, I think in reality, and me being right outside of DC, politics is, you simply cannot, you can't be the jack of all trades. The Chirag who's in DC and even the team members that are there probably cannot get out there and know all these people on a relationship business. When you have these outside lobbyists, they've got insights, they've got relationships that they've held over years and years, and so that's what makes a difference compared to Chirag running out there and saying, hey, this is what we have to do. So to answer your question, yeah, we have lobbyists and focused on things that are relevant. So if it's something on loans, if it's something on CMBS, whatever, we'll make sure that lobbyists focus on that issue there.
And one other thing I'd add to that, and Vinay had touched on it earlier, is as important as it is to have subject matter experts, nothing can replace the value of a local hotelier going to your member of Congress or your local elected official and telling them exactly about the problem. So as we work to do our part here in DC, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for you to talk to your elected officials and tell them exactly what you're seeing, and tell them how you think it can be fixed. And then they'll come to us and we'll say, hey, here's our proposal, or point them to me, point them to Chirag, point them to Joe. And we're happy to give them the legislative proposals that we think will work. But educating your lawmakers, I think, is the most effective thing that you can do. And you can't do it enough, because the urgency is there, as you all know so well.
Building on that, Chris, we had one attendee ask this question, and Joe, maybe this is good for you to jump in here. But they were asking the question, politicians listen to their constituents. How do we as a hotel industry not just mobilize owners to reach out to these politicians asking for relief, but how do we mobilize potentially our workers or other residents in the community that know the value of these hotels to reach out, to communicate with these politicians, to ask for their support?
Well, I'll throw in one idea that I have been a prophet and proponent for before I came on board this organization. And when I worked in DC, my entree into the American Hotel and Lodging Association was they were a member of ours, in a program that we had that focused on employee voter engagement. And I can tell you that engaging employee voters to care about the issues that impact their company, their industry, and their jobs can produce a powerful army for us. And we still have a long way to go within the hotel industry of taking advantage of the credibility of the employer with these individuals, and the fact that they are looking for information from us and will accept it and will act on it. And there are some really easy ways to get started doing that, and then some really deep ways to get very sophisticated with it. But one thing that we are doing here in Ohio is starting to engage more of the associates, and the word we use is employee voters, because that's what we want the lawmakers to understand. They're employees and they vote, and that can make a huge difference. There are some technical and infrastructure ways to do that, but that's a big help. The other thing that we do at the travel economy side of it is we are trying to mobilize as many of our partners within what I define as the travel economy in Ohio, and that includes the attractions and the destination marketing organizations and our suppliers and publishers, so that they are, first of all, understanding these issues and then talking to the officials about them as well. And in the call that Chris and I had with the congressman today, our lead in setting that up and welcoming everybody was the head of the local visitors bureau and a member of my board. And I think that that helps us carry the message beyond just being the industry making the ask. So we've got to work with those partners whose financial health depends on us.
I would agree with Joe. And one other thing that I would add is that AHLA has a grassroots portal, hotelsact.org, or you can go to ahla.com/hotelsact. And throughout this entire crisis, we've utilized this platform to have employees engage with members of Congress. We started off with about 3,500 members, and now we have 4,000 members. We've done about 140,000 actions, really an incredible number, and something that, after this crisis, I think to Joe's point, our industry is going to have to take a deep look at how is it that we build stronger relationships with members of Congress so that we don't need to educate them on these issues. They know our businesses, they know how they operate, and when tough times come, they know how to help us. And, it is a complicated business, and we've made a long strides. For example, with AHLA partnering with AAHOA, in a close basis, and with leaders like Joe at the state level and his expertise and partnership, we've come a long way as an industry, but we certainly have a long ways to go to make sure that members of Congress and legislators at all level understand the business on a regular basis, so that when we're in challenging times, we can just go to them with the specific ask as opposed to the education side of it as well.
Oh, maybe
that.
one or two more questions, Kyle.
Yeah, guys, I would say the single question that we've gotten with the greatest frequency during this webinar is a reference to Ethan Penner. He's been on a lot of webinars lately talking. He's been referred to as the godfather of CMBS. He has some critiques about CMBS. He's made comments that it was built to solve a liquidity issue, and it wasn't really built to be resilient and move through crisis. And the questions ask, what do you think the future of the CMBS structure is going to be, given how its rigid nature is providing complications during this time? Do any of you think that CMBS is going to be dead for hoteliers, for example, because they just look at this lack of flexibility as something that is not possible for their business and creates too much risk? So Monty, if I can start with you here, what are your thoughts about the future of CMBS as we reflect on this experience that we're going through now and very much in the middle of?
I think that CMBS will continue to evolve. The CMBS industry was not geared, designed, as it were, to deal with situations like the one that we're in. And I think that going forward, it will evolve and continue to exist. It is a product that both borrowers appreciate and use, and investors appreciate and use, but it will evolve in order to better take into account pandemics, because it needs to.
Vinay, any thoughts on that you'd like to add, is in terms of how you might be considering using it or not in the future, and if there were structural changes to CMBS, where you think some of that structural change needs to be addressed?
To answer your original question, as far as will it continue, I still remember in 2007 and 8, I had a CMBS loan and I worked out on it. After the whole thing, I said, this is never going to come back. The CMBS, the way it was, I don't think it'll ever come back. Lo and behold, here we were in 2016, slowly came back, obviously in a different version, but it's still back, it came back again. So I think that it will continue to exist, maybe obviously not in the next short term, but it'll evolve into what's there and it'll adjust to what's there. But I think that it'll definitely come back again eventually. I mean, and one of the things that Americans as a whole tend to forget very easily. And so what happens here? So, and I hate to say this, just a few weeks ago, I myself am thinking, what did I do getting myself into this? I could have gone to a local lender and this would have been much better. But again, that's my decision thinking today, as most owners. But I bet you in 3, 4, 5 years down the road, when this thing comes get out of here, I mean, if it's better, we'll get back in there somehow or another, back something that's different but there.
Thanks for that. And look, we're running up to the end of our time, so I'm going to end it on one last question, and hopefully we can provide a little hope for our audience here. Let's let's talk about recovery for a moment. What do you guys think recovery looks like? Please give us some specifics on what you're thinking around timing. And can you provide some commentary on how you think our business, how hotel operations will be permanently changed because of this pandemic? And why don't we just start from left to right in terms of your pictures on the screen here. So, Vinay?
Sure. You know, how long will it take? You know, I was on the STR webinar recently, and this year we're looking at 50%. I think if I'm looking at January of 2021 and look back and what happened in 2020, I think year end will probably weak occupancy. Obviously, rates are very, very weak, and I think it's going to take some time to recover. I think the industry as a whole will change. I think that the cleanliness will change. I think even in some of the mid-scale economy hotels, breakfast should change or will change. Housekeeping services, I think, will change. There are a lot of things that are the touch points that we see today. Eventually, will probably change to gear towards the cleanliness and keeping it clean. So, but I think it's a long road. I honestly feel that it's going to be a long while before we come back to these numbers that we've been seeing in 2019.
Monty?
Monty? Monty, go ahead.
Yeah, why don't we go with Chris, and we'll circle back to Monty if we can get him back.
I apologize, you guys were cutting out there. Could you repeat it again? I can't quite hear you coming through.
Oh, I apologize, Monty. So we were just asking about what are your thoughts on recovery? What are your thoughts on the timeline of what the recovery takes? And also, how do you think the hotel industry will be permanently changed, given the pandemic and the new norms that will develop?
It's the latter that I'm more and most concerned with, about how our industry might change going forward. As far as recovery, that's hard to say. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think that we'll get a bounce back here the next few months, but then to get to where we were the last 20% or so, it'll be a long, slow slog. But as far as how everything looks going forward, that's a big question that I wish I had a better answer to. Flying on planes is something that affects markets like Hawaii completely and totally. And that has been a great spot for vacationers and for high-end corporate groups. And will that market be affected forever? I think that more drive-to destinations type of facilities are going to see less impact and probably little long-term type effect, in my opinion. But those hotels that cater to groups or cater to airline travel are going to see changes and might see changes that are more permanent. There might be more of a desire to skip the front desk and to go straight to the rooms through some of the technologies that are out there. There may be less of a desire to hold meetings or to have fewer people in meetings. Heck, we might even see fire codes in some cities changed, and instead of just a fire code rating on a meeting room, but a pandemic code or something where the number of people in a room are limited. It's just hard to say, and I think the states and even around the world will take different views on all this. But I think there's a lot of things that we could potentially see. Long term, I think that the industry will have as much demand or more as it does now. It just might take a different shape. It's almost like after 9/11, the security in airports changed forever. You can't just walk up to a gate without a ticket and the like, and the security screening is much more thorough. However, airline travel is much more prominent, and there's much more demand for it now than there was back then, despite the fact that there were some serious changes in how it was done. And so we might see that in our industry too.
Thanks for that. Very insightful. Chris, any comments on this one from the national view and the association?
I think it's going to be a long road, but I'm optimistic. I know my family wants to travel. I know we want to get out there and see the country and see the world, and get staying at all of your great hotels. And to that point, AHLA is going to be launching a campaign to have the focus, on those positive thoughts, so that when travelers do feel safe and they do feel it's healthy to travel, they will. One initiative that AHLA is working on to help with that narrative is our Stay Safe program, which is focused on enhanced cleaning practices, social interaction, and workplace protocols to help meet the new health and safety challenges and expectations that are presented by COVID-19. So we're working with industry leaders, from brands to management companies to owners and state associations, to help craft that message. So one, first, people feel safe and they feel that it's healthy to stay at a hotel, but two, that they get excited about it. And I think it's a dual track approach, and it's something that we at the national level and as an association feel that we have an important role to play, and we look forward to taking that opportunity and helping across the board.
Thanks, Chris. Joe, at the state level in Ohio, what are your thoughts?
Very quickly, I think when you look at some of the corporate decision-making that's happening, large, multinational corporations, national corporations in the U.S. saying they're not going to travel this year, the fact that we're into May, I'm normally thinking about Christmas presents for my wife this time of year, and that's easy. What we're dealing with is hard. We're into 2021 already. I'm going to be positive going forward, but I'm going to be realistic. And I think that we've got a long way to go before recovery is even feasible, and we're into next year already. Group business is going to be different for the reasons that we talked about, and that's going to massively change the industry. On the flip side, I think our unique lodging segments are going to boom. And anybody who wants to invest in cabin properties or the like in Hocking Hills in Ohio, I'll point you in that direction, because I think they're going to take off. And the one bright spot I'll think of going forward is, what's one change? I think that we're going to be better prepared, and the industry is going to be better prepared for disruption going forward. Disruption can happen in a lot of different ways. We can have this, come back at us even in a meaner, stronger way, and flare up again. We can have other, health situations. I've always said, I'm a proponent of always talking about terrorism risks and other challenges like that to our industry as well. I do think one bright side is we found out the ways that we are not prepared for disruption, and hopefully we're fixing some of those.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to use that to conclude. I'm very, very thankful for all of you attending today, and the panelists have been very insightful, very thoughtful. Appreciate your candidness and your time. So to the audience, we will have a copy of this webinar sent out to everybody. You see our contact information on the screen if you want to email us with any questions. And in the meantime, we hope you all stay safe. And to our panelist group, thank you for attending. And hopefully you guys can enjoy the weekend. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.